Hi, Honors Bio. My name is Mrs. Suko, and I am a teacher at Cary Grove High School, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about my experience with cystic fibrosis. CF is a genetic disease that is passed down and inherited when both parents have a gene mutation under the CF family. I actually have Delta 508, which is one of the most common, or is the most common of the mutations that CF people have. 70% of people who have cystic fibrosis have that mutation. My husband has R347, which is also pretty common and something that is really treatable, which is really great and positive for my son, who is a year and a half, who was diagnosed with CF at birth. Now, as of 10 years ago, they do a newborn screening in the hospital where they take a drop of blood and they test for 70 of the most common gene or genetic disorders, and CF is now one of them, which is really, really positive because for so long, children who had cystic fibrosis weren't being diagnosed. So they would be 2 or 3 and have lots of complications, and they weren't receiving medicine or treatment that really could have been life-saving. So my son is at an awesome advantage because he's been treated since 2 weeks old, and his screening came back that he did have cystic fibrosis. So we ended up at 2 weeks, we took him into the hospital for what's called a sweat test. So they test and they warm up his legs so much so that it sweats, and they collect that sweat, and they test for his salt level. So everybody's, when we sweat, we have traces of salt in our sweat. But for a cystic fibrosis patient, they have really, really sweaty salts. So sometimes if we give him a kiss on his forehead and he's really hot, we can taste that salt. It's very, very potent, and it's very obvious that he's losing some of those nutrients in his body that he needs, to be healthy and to survive. So what do we do to combat that? Well, we actually put salt in his milk. So he drinks a salty milk bottle once a day to get some of the extra salts into his body, and we try to fit in salt into his diet as well. So something that is really common for CF patients is they can't process food in the way that we naturally process food. So Jordan has to take enzyme capsules, which our bodies naturally produce, but his body does not produce. So in order to absorb nutrients and to be healthy, he does need to take that with every meal. So he takes about 6 pills a day right now. That'll probably increase, but for now it's doing the job. I think something that people don't necessarily know about cystic fibrosis is they see a lot of the lung issues, and those are the life-threatening issues related to the lungs that definitely cause a early mortality rate for people with cystic fibrosis. But it also affects the GI tract. So again, like I was saying with his digestion, a lot of complications can arise from not being able to process food. So, for example, my son was actually just in the hospital this last weekend. He's doing great, but he had a touch of the stomach flu over spring break. He got sick a couple of times and got dehydrated. So, and as a result, he wasn't ingesting his enzymes. And so in his intestines, mucus that forms in the lungs can also form in other organs and in other parts of the body. So he had really, really thick blockage in his intestines, and he wasn't digesting food. And luckily, he was happy. He wasn't complaining of anything. But we just called our doctor just to check in, just to see, make sure everything was okay. And we ended up bringing him to Lutheran General, which is where he's treated very regularly. So we had to flush out his system, but I'm happy to report there was no damage done. It could have been way worse had we waited, but with cystic fibrosis, you have to really stay on top of it to make sure that the patient is healthy and the patient is everything is functioning as it should. So speaking of what does CF look like in our daily lives, for us, Jordan takes medicine every day, and he needs to take that in order to process food. He also does a vest treatment, which is lung percussion, which breaks up any mucus that could be forming in his lungs, and he only does that once a day. So with his 2 mutations, his second mutation, R347, tends to be more GI based and less lung based. So for us, we're really hoping that until he's high school age, probably about your age, he should have really, really clear and healthy normal lungs. So I don't think a lot of people realize that there are thousands of mutations for CF, and the types of mutations you have can greatly differ the gene expression and how it manifests into each patient. So for Jordan, we have as good of genes as you can for having cystic fibrosis. So he has 2 of, like I said, he has 2 of the most common mutations, which there's a lot of medicine on the market for him specifically, and hopefully he's more GI based, which is something that we can really regulate and monitor ourselves a lot easier than maybe some of the other mutations or other variants of cystic fibrosis. You know, it's hard on a daily basis. We try to treat Jordan as normal as possible, and he's completely normal, and he's a goofy 1.5-year-old, and he has 2 older sisters who do not have cystic fibrosis. So it's been fun to watch them all grow up together. But at the same time, too, we have to take extra precautions. We have hand sanitizer everywhere in our house, and germs are a huge issue for us and our family. And Jordan's autoimmune system is actually not weaker than anyone else's. It's very normal. But when he does get sick, like with that stomach bug, it can very quickly escalate into something CF related. So even though he's not more likely to get a cold or get sick than anyone else, sometimes we have to be really careful about how we treat that and how we view that. Some of the side effects of cystic fibrosis can be coughing and difficulty breathing, and I think, again, those are the common things that people know about, but that's not really something that Jordan is dealing with right now. Some of his issues are, like I said, the GI related issues. So sometimes he's a little smelly. You know, he is definitely a thriving, little boy. In terms of his long-term prognosis, currently life expectancy is 47. It actually has risen from 27 to 37 to 47 very quickly in the last few years. Cystic fibrosis is one of the rare diseases that they're on the edge of really finding not only great treatments, but potentially a cure with CRISPR and all the DNA rewriting and things of that nature that are going on. So there's a ton of exciting research out there, and again, the CF community is on the cutting edge of that. And what's neat to think about is if they can figure out how to cure CF, they could cure dozens and dozens of rare diseases and really provide a lot of support to people who struggle in so many different ways. So we're really hopeful. Again, Jordan has good mutations if there are good mutations to have, and so we think that, he will have to be due treatment, he will have to watch it, and he'll have to take care of it, but we're hoping that he can really have a full and normal life. Having cystic fibrosis has really changed our outlook in a lot of ways. We as a family are really positive. We are a pretty religious family, and we really have a great, wonderful extended family that we're very close with. But facing something that challenges you to really think about your own mortality and the mortality of your children really can change your outlook. It was a really rough first few months learning about his diagnosis, and obviously going to the hospital when we weren't expecting it was not fun. But at the same time too, I think about, there's this ancient Japanese art form called raku, in which they take pottery and then they heat it up using green tea so much so that it cracks. And then they take those cracks and they fill them in with precious metals and gold. And and take something that was perfect, quote unquote, then broken, they make it more beautiful. And I think that's what CF does for my family. We realize that, life is short and life is precious. So it's really critical to really think about and value, the time that you have together. And I know it's cliche, but that phrase, life isn't about how many breaths you take, but how many moments that take your breath away. And, I think that's what we think about for our family and for our son is no matter what we face, we are going to make each moment count, and we are really going to treasure that together. So I hope that answers some of your questions about CF, or just gives you a personal look on what cystic fibrosis is. Cystic fibrosis, again, can manifest in a lot of different ways, and gene expression really does matter, and those mutations really do matter. So if you're doing any research, check out the different variants and mutations, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So I hope that you guys have a great project with what you're learning right now, and again, I hope that you learned a little bit more about cystic fibrosis.
You want to go home?